Hi, I'm Sharon Caldwell, Caldwell Saddle Company. We've got a shop in Toccoa, Georgia, and today I'd like to talk to you folks about things that are important to you and your horse. We're going to talk about saddle trees. We're going to talk about saddle fit. We're actually going to look at some horses and tell you how the saddle trees and the saddle fit actually can improve your performance. We have a friend and a customer, Anna Purcell, with us, and she has asked me to give her this information. First thing that you had a problem with is why some saddles sit so different than others. So the first thing I'm going to tell you about that, Anna, is about the trees. Okay. This is one of our trees, and it is built totally different than one of anyone else's in the country. Anna, for years, the saddle that you've recently traded into us was on a tree similar to this. And if you remember, you sat in the back of that saddle, which put your weight into the horse's rear end. You couldn't sit down on the middle because you had this big, huge hump right here.
What was the hump?
Well, what causes this hump is the tree maker is afraid of a tree breaking. Now, he knows that that tree wasn't going to fit a horse. And it's not the saddle maker, the tree maker. He goes to that, the saddle maker goes to the tree maker and says, give me a tree. He doesn't design his trees. So the tree maker's responsibility is to provide trees for the saddle maker. And what they're doing is a horse's back is curved like this, right? Okay. Instead of curving the wood down into the horse's back like this, they're taking that wood and they're turning this wood up this direction. So more or less you have an inverted V, if you'll look at that. Show you folks at home what I'm talking about. You can see an inverted V shape in this tree. Well, by doing this inverted V, it makes it harder to break the tree. A tree normally breaks in this spot right here. By turning the wood up like that, you make it where the short edge can absorb a lot more pounding than the flat edge, okay? Now, what causes the problem on a horse is that a horse's back is not built like an inverted V. A horse basically, if you were a little angel flying above his body and looked down at him, you would see that he was wide and flat back at the loin. And then he would go forward and he'd go down and then he'd pop open like this at the shoulder. Now that low spot in his back, right behind the wither, if you were riding bareback, that's where you'd sit. All right, when you're sitting in that low spot, all the way down his shoulder, between his shoulder and his barrel, there's a groove that your leg would just naturally fall in, okay? Now, if you're riding this inverted V shape, this huge mass right here would keep your leg from going anywhere near that low point of the horse's side, right?
Right.
So your leg would have to fall across this huge tree. Your bottom would be sitting here because you can't sit here. Every time the horse moved, it would throw you back to this low spot. Follow that? Now, whatever the tree is directly relates to the saddle. You can see this tree, once you understand what you're looking at, very plainly through the leather. This is one of ours, and if you look at this tree and look at this saddle, this tree and this saddle are almost the identical items. This swell is slightly higher, the horn's slightly different, but basically you can see the contour of this saddle. And there's that low spot right here that you don't get here. Okay? And when you take this tree and put it right next to this one, can you see obvious difference? Exactly. This looks like a horse's back. This doesn't. Now there's going to be some differences. These aren't identical trees, but basically what we're talking about here is the bar right here. Can you see? There's the low spot with the big hump here. Here's your low spot with the big hump here. The first warning sign that you should have when you're looking at a saddle to think about purchasing or riding this thing is if the low spot isn't right there in the middle of the saddle over the same place that your butt would be if you were riding bareback, there's no way it could possibly fit the horse. Now, what this causes when you turn these bars up is you end up with this inverted V getting pressure points here and here. That's basically the only place that touches a horse.
Which is bad, right?
Oh, very bad. Because what you're doing is you're taking your weight and your saddle's weight, and you're taking that weight and spreading it out on an area that's no more than 8 inches. So your pounds per square inch are greatly increased. Now, if you have a tree like this whole bar, which is about 23 inches long, is going to touch him all the way down. So now you're spreading all this weight out. We also do another little funky thing. On this outer edge, instead of curving this outer edge down where it would fit him perfectly with the tree just sitting there on his back, we actually curve this outer edge up about the outer ½ inch.
Why do you do that?
Well, a person like you is not going to cause that back on that horse any pain at all.
Because of weight?
Because of weight. If you took a gentleman that weighed 250 pounds on that same horse, the pressure of him riding here would push equally this tree down into the horse's back, and it would actually have more area on a heavier weight person touching the back than it would on a lightweight person.
I see.
Follow? Now, if you folks at home can see the curve of the back of this tree, you can see how wide and flat, and you can see that this would sit down on a horse. And we're comparing that to this, and exactly how big a horse could this tree really fit? Well, a large dog, a weanling, I guarantee you it could not fit a full-size riding horse. Most people, when they go into stores, you've probably done this or seen people do it, you come up and you look at the front end to see how wide it is. In general, tree makers and saddle makers got this right 30 years ago. I'm not saying there won't be some variance. The biggest variance in this is we have people that refer to saddles as either a semi-quarter horse bar or a full quarter horse bar. There is no difference in the tree. They're the identical tree with simply the bars moved further apart. If you move the bars further apart, it will sit down better on a horse's back. But what's going to happen when that happens, Anna, is that the width here is going to be spread further apart, and you're going to feel like you're sitting in a barrel. Have you ever ridden one that right across here feels like you're just sitting on top of a whiskey barrel? Yeah, and that's what caused it. The tree, in general, will fit better.
But not for the rider.
But not for the rider. Right. Okay, if this is so bad, why don't you want to sit in the rear of the saddle?
Because you can't ride that way. You're unbalanced.
Exactly. Anna's a barrel racer, and speed's important to her. When you're sitting in the middle of your horse, he can operate his hindquarters, and he can grab dirt, and he's not going to ever be slowed down. if you were to take and shift your weight back onto his hips, like what this is going to do, just like you say, you're stopping him, you're making him slow down, he's having to work to pick you up, even if it is only 100 pounds. So by sitting in the middle of your horse, you're going to increase his comfort level, his speed, and his performance. The only people that I can think of that actually sit in the back of their horse in order to get a gait is a Tennessee walking horse rider. And they deliberately shift their weight to the back to lighten the front end because they have a big lick walking horse and they need to do this. It's not best for the horse. It's not the most comfortable position for the horse, but that's what he has to do to perform the gait. When you're talking about riding, roping, reining, cutting, barrel racing, any of those events, you have to sit in the middle of the saddle and let him work. The tree itself should fit low spot in the saddle over low spot of the horse. Okay, now, I know we talked about they do it because they don't want it to break. But if we can do it, why can't they? Right? Mm-hmm. The wood in this tree is an indigenous wood to the western United States where most of the tree companies are located. They use ponderosa pine and Douglas fir for the most part. Both of these woods are very soft woods. You have to use a softwood to build a saddle tree instead of a hardwood, because if you had a hardwood and say your horse rammed into a gate or flipped over backwards, God forbid, that would shatter the hardwood because it simply couldn't absorb the impact. By using what we do, which is our local indigenous wood, southern yellow pine, we actually get a better tree because although southern yellow pine is an indigenous wood to us, southern yellow pine is a lot stronger softwood.
Well, why don't you use rawhide?
Oh,
Plastic.
well, now we use rawhide. We actually cover the tree with rawhide.
Okay.
And the rawhide gives you a lot of your strength and your flexibility. This is covered in rawhide. Now, plastic? No. Anytime you use a formed plastic, you're going to have a breakdown because of, believe it or not, UV rays. UV rays can actually penetrate a finished saddle through the leather. And it doesn't even have to be bright sunshine. It can be diffused sunshine. You can, in Colorado even, the UV rays are penetrating all the way through the leather and going into the tree. Plastic will absolutely deteriorate under UV rays.
I see.
So that's why we don't use, one of the reasons we don't use plastic. Another is that plastic isn't as tough as you think it is. And in order to make the tree bars, they have to add what we call a ground seat. Now, when you use a tree like this or a tree like that, we actually take a piece of steel, lay down on this to form the seat where the rider's going to sit. If you have a plastic tree or a fiberglass tree, they build the fiberglass and the plastic into this to create the ground seat and the tree all in one piece to make it even stronger.
What's wrong with that? Why don't y'all do that?
If you have a preformed ground seat in your saddle, you can't alter the seat. It's going to make every seat fit exactly the same for everybody. Well, I can't wear your jeans. Right. And I shouldn't be riding your saddle. There's going to be certain things about the size that you use and the shape of your saddle that's going to be uniquely special to you. And it should be. If we're all going to ride the same saddle, then we all might just have to ride the same jean, and that's not proper for you, your jeans, or your horse, and or your saddle. So everything needs to be specialized, really, for your height, your weight, how you ride.
Okay.
Okay? When I have these two trees beside each other, one of the most obvious things about these isn't just that this one sits lower to the table, just like it would sit lower to your horse. There's also the problem of the shape this way. That horse that we were looking at a minute ago, when we were being angels, when you were over him, he had a shape this way.
Right.
When you stood beside him on the ground and looked straight across his back, he's got this too. So a horse kind of has what we call a double twist. He's got this opening up to his shoulders, and he's got this going down to the low part of his back and up to his withers. A tree should have that same thing. You should be able to look at this tree and see that it's going to be flat on his back here, curve in here, and spread out at the shoulder. If this came straight ahead at the shoulder, when that horse would try to turn like this, he would get a pressure point. Turn around, let me show you. Right here, instead of the tree sitting here, which would allow him to turn, it would fall back because it's too narrow behind his shoulder blade here.
Stop him.
And stop him from turning. Right. So if you have a tree that's too narrow, like this one is here, you're creating improper pressure points. Okay? And you can see that this tree goes straight ahead. It doesn't have any of the hourglass shape that that one's got.
I see it.
So it's not just a matter of the seat here, it's also the matter of the hourglass shape. Here, this lets your legs fall down naturally in that little groove along the horse's side, just like it should.
Okay. Makes perfect sense.
Anything else you can think of that we haven't covered on that?
No. It's crystal clear.
Okay. Now, once we have the saddle tree, and we've got that double twist we need, and we've got the saddle tree that's going to fit the horse, we're going to take and we're going to transfer that tree to the saddle, and everything in the saddle here has got to go with the same balance as what this tree does. We're going to set the rider in the middle here on this nice narrow area where he's not spread apart and he's not sitting above the horse. This open end of the saddle, we beat our skirts around, so there again, he not only has the opening on the tree, he actually has it on the saddle. If you can look at that front end, you can see how this is turned out instead of coming straight ahead.
I see.
Okay? Now, there's a balance point on the rigs also. The rigs are the D-rings or the C-plates that hold your girth onto the saddle.
Okay.
And you can have the best sitting saddle in the world, you can have the best fitting tree in the world. And if the rigging is wrong, you can just completely ruin the fit. If you took this tree and rigged it perfectly, where it pulled down from the front and the rear, even though this is not a good tree and there's too many pressure points over 2 little inches on the horse's back, you can make it spread the weight out front and rear. And the rings on the saddle should basically be as close to that low spot as you can get, so that when you pull down from here, you're going to pull down from the back and the front both.
Equally.
Right. Now, if you take a D-ring, a rigging position, and move it too far forward, what's going to happen is that.
So that's why I see saddles that sit on horses' backs. Lift it up.
Right.
I understand.
It's actually caused by 2 things. One, if the tree is too narrow here in the front and you put it up on the horse's shoulders, when you cinch it up, the minute that horse rotates his shoulders, if it's too narrow there, it'll walk backwards. And it'll walk into that area of his back instead of here, back here. And when it walks back here, the tail end of the saddle will sit up. So that's the first thing. The other is the rigging position.
Okay.
9 out of 10 times, all you have to do if a saddle has the back end up in the air is untie it, move it forward, and recinch. It should make the back end sit down. But if the tree's too narrow, in just a matter of minutes, it'll walk back again. Now, you can make it do that by moving this rigging forward. Have you ever heard the expression full double rig?
No.
You haven't? Well, it's a commonly used term in the industry. It refers to the fact that this C-plate, or a D-ring in most cases, is directly under the middle of this swell.
Which is incorrect.
Yeah. There's not a horse in the world that can ride a full double rigging. Now, horses have changed. They've gotten a lot faster in the last few years. And we're not talking about just like barrel racing horses that you ride. Horses have also gotten faster in cutting, roping, reining. Boy, when they turn some fast circles, I mean, they're really turning fast circles. And to blow your mind, conformation changes with speed. The straighter the shoulder, the faster the horse. And for years, people have probably told you that the correct shoulder angle is 45 degrees.
Right.
No, it's not. 45 degrees is the correct angle if you want a show horse or in a conformation class, or if you're in a pleasure class where you want a horse to have a beautiful, long, sweeping gait. The more laid back the shoulder, the longer that gait is going to be and the slower it's going to be. If you want a horse to go fast, the shoulder rotates like most thoroughbreds. I worked on a thoroughbred farm for 3 years. We never saw a 45-degree angle. 55, 65, 75, and more. The shoulder rotates forward, and the leg coming off the shoulder gives almost a straight line. So what happens is you get a pendulum action. The straighter that line is, the faster that pendulum, which is the leg, runs.
Okay.
Now, with the speed being put into all these other events, all other horses as well as barrel horses are developing a straighter shoulder. I happen to own a mare right now, great cutting mare, all the action in the world, but she has one problem. She's got a 45-degree angle, and I don't get any speed out of her. So we bred her to a horse that will probably give us a faster baby. And sure enough, we just started the baby in training. The shoulder is not a 45, it's closer to a 55, and the first thing the trainer calls and tells me is, this is got all the action just like her mama, but she's a faster horse. Why? Because she's got a straighter shoulder. Okay. I know that's contrary to what you've been told, but it really works. Now, here's the problem. The straighter the shoulder, the further back the rig's got to be. If you've got a horse and you move that shoulder blade forward like this, the wither follows that shoulder forward. So the saddle has to follow that wither forward.
Okay.
Well, when you move that saddle further up on the horse, that D-ring also is going to be pulled further up. And if you don't have it set far enough back, you're going to go to cinch your horse, and you're going to have that D-ring falling straight through that leg, straight across the arm. Have you ever had that happen or seen it where the saddle...
Seen it.
Yeah, you just couldn't get the saddle to cinch up in the right spot. So in order to ride it, you back it up. You back it up, and then you've got...
Problems.
Right, you've got the rear end sticking up in the air. If you've got a low spot back here, and you're cinched up with your pressure points in gear like that, this thing is now unsafe because your rear end is loose, and if you stop the horse, his momentum is going to throw you forward. Had a saddle throw you forward? Okay.
Sure have.
That's what causes it.
Okay.
So the straighter the shoulder, the further back the rigging's got to be. Now, you see a lot of cheap saddles or old saddles before they knew better, and the D-rings are not only too far forward, but they're also way up here. because that's what started everybody putting the D-rings forward. All right, now here's a saddle that has the rigging too far forward. The D-ring, the center of the D-ring, is directly through the middle of the swell. Come look over here. Can you see where the D-ring is right through the middle of the swell? Now, at that point, that is a full double, which to me is a four-letter word, because it just doesn't work. Now, here's a trick that you can do to check a saddle. Take your thumbs and hook them on the D, just like if you were going to cinch this saddle down on the horse,
Okay.
and push straight down. See how the back of that saddle
Is lifting up.
lifting up? That's the same thing that's going to happen when you cinch it on a horse. All right, now if that's the case, why is it there? Doesn't make sense.
No.
Well, the reason that D-ring is there is because had they backed this thing up to where it would be right for the horse, I want you to look, it would be right under that fender.
Mm-hmm.
Well, horses can't talk, but the riders can. So if this rig were back here under this fender, look at the knot you would have. And people would call the company that made the saddle and say, I can't ride this saddle, I have a big knot under my leg.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the horse can't tell them, I can't ride this saddle because you're killing my shoulders by pulling it down in the front. So they're going to listen to the rider that's going to be buying this saddle. And they're going to move this rigging up here so this fender will lay flat right there.
Okay.
Now, how you can solve the problem, because if you notice this rig is under this fender. But what we've done is we've lowered this rigging.
So the knot's not under your leg.
Right. The horse, his round barrel like this, and instead of the rigging being up here on the top where your leg would run into it, we've dropped it. So your leg can run over it, and this rigging is going to be down on the bottom turn of his rounded barrel.
Okay.
Okay? That's the same thing that's true when you talk about an in-skirt rigging. Basically, you have three kinds of rigging. You have in-skirt rig, where the D's are actually mounted in your skirt leather. You have a flat plate, which is what this one is, which is a double hung rigging, hung over a skirt. This is your standard double hung rigging. Here, see, there's your front D, back D, and a connector strap. So this is a standard double hung, and this double hung is still hung on the tree over the skirt just like this, only the flat plate is a little more comfortable for the rider because you have less bulk. And your front rig and your connector is made into one piece. Okay? So in-skirt, flat plate, and standard double hung. Okay? Now, the saddle has several other balance points other than the seat and the rig. Another one of the balance points is the stirrup and the fender. This is as equally a balance point as the seat and the rig. When we talked about that horse having that little groove down his side where your leg would fit, your fender should do the same thing as that groove. The fender should wrap around your leg, and your leg should fall in this groove here.
Okay.
Have you ever had to lope your horse and you've stood in the stirrups and the stirrups kick back?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Because they won't move forward.
Well, what causes that kickback is the cut of the fender itself. It doesn't have a balance point. I've got another saddle over here that will show you a bad fender.
Okay.
All right, and I went and found this saddle for you so I could show you the balance point. When I lift this and look at this fender, this will give you an idea of what you need to look for in a saddle. This area is called the chapel, the little pointed part at the top that attaches to your stirrup leather. This part's called the bell. And we're going to draw a line from the chapel in a straight line right to where your foot would go in that saddle. Okay, there's your straight line, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, in front of that straight line, that's the center balance of that fender, I want you to see that you have that much leather. Now, look at how much is behind it.
What's wrong with that?
Well, this part of your fender weighs more than that part of your fender.
Okay.
So if I push down here, did you see what happened?
Moves back.
This part doesn't weigh as much as this, so this heavier part pulls the fender backwards.
Okay.
You see that?
Mm-hmm.
So the balance on the fender is cut wrong. Basically, this is cut in just one long rectangle with the stirrup hung on the front edge of that rectangle. Okay?
Okay.
Now this one has got balance. With this fender, we're going to look at the same balance points. We're going to check from the chapel down to the stirrup tread. And when I draw a line, where does it go?
In the middle.
In the middle. Now, take your thumb and press down right there on the middle. See how the fender pulls straight down? Because this part of the fender weighs as much as this part. Now, this gives a real strange shape to a fender when you cut it like this. It has almost a C shape. But by folding this up at the back, you end up with a fender that wraps around the leg. Okay, there. See this C?
Mm-hmm.
So by putting a fender together in this way, the stirrup is actually going to become a balance part of that fender.
Okay.
Oh, while we're on this little thing right here and I'm adjusting this, I want to talk about that.
Okay.
This is called a hobble strap, and this holds everything together. It holds the stirrup leather and the fender and holds the stirrup on the fender.
Okay.
This is one of the single most important things for safety that you can ever do for yourself. Never take this off.
Why not?
If you were to have this stirrup leather break,
Mm-hmm.
or if you were to have this slide fall apart or get too loose and simply move up, your stirrup would fall off. Well, at a dead run, you don't necessarily want to lose your stirrup without any warning, okay? If you have a hobble strap, even if something here breaks,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to feel that give, and you've got time to pull up and save yourself.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're going to be thrown. There is no help for that. You should be able to adjust a fender without taking this. You say, well, I have to take it off to raise and lower. You
Right.
don't. A proper stirrup leather should be hung on the outside like this, so that all you have to do to raise or lower is that. Do you follow how we did that? You simply slide the blevins slide up, bring it down to the hole you want it, lower the blevins slide over the post, and rotate the fender from the top.
Okay.
There are people that make one size fits all, just like trees or just like jeans, and they will take this stirrup leather and they'll fold it inside, where the only way you can move it up or down a hole is to take this blevin slide off, and it's quite aggravating. And the other bad thing is you get this huge bulk right here at your ankle,
Mm-hmm.
And when you put your foot in the stirrup, you can actually get blisters or bruises rubbed on the top of your foot. So I recommend that anybody that has them tucked to the inside, take it to a good saddle maker and have it switched around properly like this.
Okay.
There was another benefit we found when we cut this fender in a big C, is that as this wraps around your leg, the Blevins slide and the stirrup leather is in front of your leg. If you'll look at how most saddles are, when you're riding, you have all the stirrup leathers and the Blevins slide between you and the horse. Mm-hmm. Here, because all of this curves around in front of the fender to the front of the C, you've got nothing touching the horse except you and your fender. So you can signal your horse and make a lot more delicate feelings between you and he. He can understand a lot simpler move.
Okay. Well, what about stirrups? I know that I've noticed some are wooden and some are aluminum, and there's different sizes. Does it really even matter? Is it just a matter of opinion, preference?
Some of it is preference, but there are rules about stirrups. If you're a person that has trouble keeping your heels down, you would never want to ride an oxbow stirrup. Oxbows are the ones that are round like this. Oxbows normally are thin enough to fit against your boot heel right here. That's the whole purpose of having a narrow stirrup, is to ride right here, what they call down home. An oxbow, the whole purpose of an oxbow is to lock your foot. When you take the flat of your foot and lock it in this stirrup like this, because it's got curved sides, it grabs your foot here and here. And in a high-action sport such as cutting, you can't lose your stirrup as long as you have pressure on it. Mm-hmm. That's why a lot of people ride an oxbow. Okay. But if you're trail riding in something like this, it's going to feel terribly uncomfortable having that narrow stirrup under the arch of your foot. When you're trail riding, you really need a platform. Number of hours in the stirrup, the wider that stirrup is, the more comfortable your foot's going to be. It's just going to be like standing on that ground. Okay. This is a 2-inch. This is the most common performance size that you have. It's narrow enough to ride down home if you need to really hold that stirrup, but it's wide enough not to make a pressure point on the bottom of your foot. Okay. The width of a stirrup is really important when it comes to the new style boots that have the crepe soles. Yeah. For years, the people that made crepe sole boots told people not even to ride them. They were great for working around the barn. They're terribly comfortable. They're warm on concrete floors. But because the soles were so thick, if you had a man that normally wore a size 11, by the time he put those things on, it was a size 13. And they do not fit well into a normal size stirrup. Okay. In really hot weather, the crepe soles can get so soft that when you're pushing down on the stirrup, it can actually mold itself around the stirrup. And if your horse were to trip or stumble, you would have a hard time pulling your foot out easily. So you've got to keep those things in mind, too, when you talk about the width of the stirrup, that your boots are important, too. Okay. Well, now we're going to go see some horses, and we're going to put some saddles on and see if we can find something that'll work. Found the right one for her, and I'm just going to point out a couple of things that we had to check to make sure we were going to be right on her horse. If you've noticed, I've got the saddle on the horse without a pad. This is something that I'm kind of, both ways about. I'm not sure that it's proper or not. You're not going to ride the horse without a pad. I realize that. But a lot of times I can see a little bit truer fit without the pad, but we've already gone through it and done it both ways, with the pad and without, so that we could really find out what we've got going here. Now we're just going to point out a couple of things that you need to look for once you've saddled your horse. We're going to talk about this freedom at the shoulder. Can you see that even though this saddle is cinched up, and I've got it cinched up about mid-tight. I want to be able to put my hand under the front edge of this saddle. That's what that curved out bar is going to do for you. It's going to allow you to get a hand between this shoulder and this saddle. If this area, when you cinch up, is so tight that you can't do that, you can imagine what kind of pressure it's going to put on your horse's shoulder. Now, the rear end on this saddle is a little wider on this horse than what I would like, but it's pretty close. It's good enough where this horse is not going to have any trouble running in it. We know that this tree is just slightly wider, but Anna rides several different horses, so we found the best fit that's going to fit for all of her horses, both the narrow kind like this one, and he is, even though he's tall, he's very narrow in the front. So this is a slightly wider saddle for him, but she can use it on this horse as well as any of our other wider horses. As you see, this horse has got about a 55-degree angle shoulder. And so the cinch is a little closer up to his arm than what it would be if he'd had a 45-degree angle shoulder like this. With the 45-degree angle shoulder, the saddle would be back about that much more. Right here, it may even look like it's sitting too far forward. But with this angle of his shoulder, this is where it needs to be. The front of this saddle needs to be sitting on his shoulder. You want to make sure that you've got room where you can put your hands around both front and back without the back end of the saddle lifting up. Okay, Anna, I think we found what you need. Well, we've taken the saddle off because I wanted you to look at the horse's conformation. This is a barrel racing horse. He's got a shoulder angle of about 55, 60 degrees. And if you notice, he's got what is referred to as a high wither. Horses don't have high withers. They have low backs. A high wither is directly connected to the angle of the shoulder. If this horse had a 45-degree angle, and let me go over a second how you're going to find the angle of the shoulder. You want to come to the point of the shoulder, and you want to come to the point of the butt and draw a line with your eye across the horse. Then draw a line along this horse's shoulder right here. That's going to give you your proper angle. If this horse had a 45-degree angle, his shoulder would lay back about like this. With a straighter shoulder, this point doesn't move down here. The top of his shoulder rotates forward. As the top of the shoulder rotates forward, the wither and back, which would be here, move from where they would be right here at the 45-degree angle, and as this pulls forward, this wither flips up in the front and drops down in the back. You follow that? Your shoulder angle here and your horse's back here, pretending this is a wither and this is a back. There's your 45-degree angle. As this pulls forward, the wither does this, which creates a low back. The back of the wither drops. The shoulder on a horse is made up of 3 pieces. There's a large sideways plate here, and then there's 2 bones that run right here. Sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, saddles aren't meant to rest up on their shoulder. Saddles are meant to rest in this hollow behind their shoulders. This is the worst thing that anybody can do to a horse. The truth is, this dip is not even something that is found on all horses. This dip is found on performance horses. If you have a horse that's out in the pasture, and he's always been out in the pasture, he is not going to have a dip at all right here. This area corresponds exactly to the fat that a horse has in his body. This dip the depth of this dip is the same thing to this horse as your pinch and inch around your waist is to a human. Because this horse is in beautifully fit condition, he's actually a little fat to muscle leaner than what he could be for optimum performance. If you take the depth of every hand that you can put in this area, as you see, if this hand were his body and this filled up, which would be equal to another 100 pounds, for every hand it's 100 pounds, this horse would carry more weight wherever he was on his body, but he would also carry more weight here. This can cause a problem of saddle fit, especially if a saddle is a little too narrow in the front. If a saddle is a little too narrow in the front to stay up on this shoulder, this flat plate, when it works, would work the saddle back to here. He wants to go out, folks. He's fine. So by moving a saddle back into this position, although it may look like, gee, that looks just like the front of a tree bar, it's not the proper place for it to be, because being behind this shoulder like this is the same as the hand behind your shoulder, just like we were talking about in the front when we were demonstrating on Anna. Now, if I took a tree and put it on this horse's back, this is one of our futurity cutting horse trees, and it's a little narrower tree than what it would be if it was a full-size cutting horse tree. I want you to look at how well it fits him. Now, I'm going to have this dip here because he is slightly underweight. He's got clearance here on his withers. The tree is sitting down on both sides of his spine with perfect contact everywhere except this little dip. And if you'll notice, when I run my hand under, I can get my hand about a half an inch under the tree. We were talking about that earlier. That's the little area that just gives a little bit of room in case there's a heavier rider that's going to ride this horse. So if you see, the low spot is directly over his back here. The back of the bars are laying down perfectly there. He's got clearance here. And this is without a pad. Had you put a pad on him, you can see that it would be absolutely perfect. Now, with a high-withered horse, I always recommend a cutback pad. Thank you. I want the pad to fill up the low portion of his back, and I want the pad to come around his withers instead of building up on top. As you build up on top of this wither, you're creating as much as an inch more pad here, which is going to make it come very close to the gullet. If you will use a cutback, it will give more room here while filling up the back here, which is what you want to do on a low-backed horse. And all straight-shouldered horses have low backs. It's part of their build. We're going to pull out another horse, and let's look at him, and just to compare him with the difference between this thoroughbred-type running horse and a little cutting horse we have over here. This is Mr. Hideaway. We're going to look at him and compare him to the last horse that we just saw. As you see immediately, there's a lot of conformational differences in this horse. He's got a much lower wither, although he has got a shoulder, while not quite as straight, he does have a little bit more than he should, probably about a 50-degree angle. This is going to make him a little faster, but that's also what gives him a little bit of a drop-off here. Okay, as you see, this cutting horse's back goes up a little rounder and a little fuller through this area. This is what we refer to as a strong loin. Anytime a horse has to really pull his butt up under himself to stop a roper, cutter, reiner, anything like this, this strong loin is really going to help this rounded area through here. Very seldom will you ever see a strong loin in a running horse such as a thoroughbred, because they're only going in a straight line. They don't ever have to pull their butt under them to stop. And they'll go up in more of a shape like this without this muscling through here. So with this muscling, you know this horse is built to stop. Okay, now if we put this saddle tree on his back, you can see that we're setting it at the same point on this shoulder. We're having to use a little bit shorter, wider tree here because of that strong loin. It goes up a little sharper. This horse has been in training for the last 18 months, and he's got just about a 50-pound gap right there. So he's getting his weight back. We put him back out on the pasture to let him be a horse for a while, and he's gained probably 50 pounds in the last 4 months. I want you to realize, though, when people are looking at this shoulder, if you have a saddle or a saddle tree, let me pick this back up and put it in position for you, that is sitting there, and that's how 9 out of 10 saddles are put on a horse, this is wrong. And there is no saddle in the world and no horse in the world that should ever be saddled like this. The front edge of that bar has got to be on that shoulder. Now, yeah, it's great for moving this shoulder. He can move it now. He can't move it when it's there. He can't turn into this. But even more important, you've got to remember that a horse's back is the weakest part of their body. Their ribs are cantilevered around their body where their gut can hold their highest amount of weight. If we were going to ride them where we should ride them, we'd be hanging under their gut. But we decided we wanted to ride on top. Well, their back is not structured to support our weight. Can you see how I can flex his back up and down with my hand? This 14 inches is really their back. Then it starts their loin here and their shoulder here. A proper fitting tree is going to support from this area here all the way to this strong area here. This area in here cannot support the weight of a saddle and rider. We have to use the shoulder and the loin. If you rode this horse bareback, in a while he'd get sore unless you were a little tyke like Anna. If you sit on your horse bareback, you can take your body and do this, jumping up and down in place, and you can actually make this horse's back really move. That's what happens when he runs. The horse's kidneys are hanging about here. If you have one of those saddles that sits the weight further to the back, like this bad tree we were looking at earlier, this is where you're going to ride him. And you will sore him right here in the loin and directly over those kidneys. If you notice, this tree doesn't even come close to his back in any position. And with that strong loin, normally you have a pressure point here, but with his strong loin going up very fast, there's your pressure point and right under this bar at the front. So this is going to hurt him and this is going to hurt him. You can always tell if a horse is crippled in the loin and hurting in the kidneys when you take your hands and you run along his back like this, and when you get to right there, he literally will fold his hind legs. I've heard people tell me, oh, well, he does that because he's ticklish. He's not ticklish, he hurts. So be very careful, keep your horse checked out, check him for pressure points, and make sure that he's not sore. You can have a horse with too much pressure on the front here, and you can actually develop not just the white spots that everybody's real common to talk about, but you can develop fistulas under the muscle. And once a horse gets a fistula, he can never be ridden again. A fistula will never go away. If you have a white spot, people say, well, the saddle was too narrow and it got a white spot on his withers. If you'll look at where the white spots are, the white spots are not on the wither. They're always on the back side of the wither here. And what is causing it, if the white spot was here, I could say, sure, maybe the front of the tree had something to do with it. But it's not. The white spot is here because what is happening is that tree is pulling back further than where it's supposed to be. Instead of being here, it's there. And that's what causes your white spot. If your front rig is too far forward, then you can see how the back end of the saddle would lift up. As you see, he's uncomfortable with me even doing that. So you can imagine what this saddle would be like if you cinched it into this position with this kind of pressure on the front of this horse. That's what causes white spots. If this bad tree were perfectly rigged and sitting in his body perfectly, even though it doesn't fit him, he could get by with it unless it was your weight on top here soaring him in the loin and kidneys. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Listen, thank you so much for your attention. Go home, take care of your horses, ride properly, and stay on the top side. Thanks again.